Luciana and I fell into the water at the same time. Jason abandoned me and chose to save Luciana, dragging my injured leg. I crawled onto the shore and immediately asked him for a divorce. Jason looked at me in disbelief. Luci can't swim. I just went to save her. Do you really have to make such a fuss? Even my 5-year-old son looked at me with indifference. Mom, you're fine. Do you really have to act so petty? I slapped Jason across the face and pinched my son's cheek. Sneering. Yes, I am that petty. Chapter 1. Jason's head turned from the force of my slap. He pressed his lips together, barely containing his anger. Virginia, can you calm down? Santiago, still young, struggled and screamed through his tears. No wonder Dad saved Aunt Luci instead of you. You're a wicked woman. You deserve to fall into the water. Dragging my aching leg, I smacked his little backside. Yes, I am wicked. Go find Luciana to be your mother then. Luciana immediately pushed me away and cradled Santiago in her arms, pretending to be heartbroken. When she was sure only I could see, she smiled provocatively. Virginia, he's just a child. He was just speaking out of anger. How could you hit him? Santiago buried himself in Luciana's embrace and screamed at the top of his lungs. I wasn't speaking out of anger. I don't want her to be my mom. She's so stupid, she can't ride horses. She doesn't play golf. She's nothing compared to Aunt Luci. Dad doesn't like her, and I don't like her either. Before he could spill any more truth, Jason cut him off sharply. Santiago, stop this nonsense. Then, standing protectively in front of them, he shielded them like a guardian, a crying child, a gentle mother, a tall, imposing father. What a lovely little family. And Luciana, of course, had to add her little touch of hypocrisy. Oh my, what a sweet and sensible child. If it were me, I couldn't bear to discipline him so harshly. You're such a ruthless mother. I curled my lips into a cold smile and stared her down. Say one more word, and the next slap will be on your face. The smile on Luciana's face instantly froze. I scoffed, turned around, and left them, Jason, the mistress, and the ungrateful brat, on the beach. The next day, I handed Jason the divorce papers. He frowned, adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses, and looked exhausted. If you take things too far, you won't be able to back down later. I'm not making a scene, just sign it. Assets will be divided according to the prenuptial agreement. As for Santiago, custody goes to you. Santiago had inherited Jason's coldness, his ruthlessness, and his lack of love for me. Rather than forcing him to stay by my side, I might as well let him be with Jason. Jason set the divorce papers down and looked at me, his indifferent face full of confusion. Just because of what happened yesterday? Luci can't swim. What's wrong with me saving her? You were fine. Does this really warrant a divorce? He spoke as if he had every right to. As if, just because I hadn't drowned, he was completely justified. Yesterday, Jason and I had taken Santiago to the beach. At one point, Jason left briefly to take care of something. When he returned, he had brought Luciana with him. He said he ran into her by chance and didn't want to leave her alone, so he invited her along. As my face darkened, Santiago, who was usually distant and only clung to me, ran excitedly into Luciana's arms. Aunt Luci, it's only been a day, but I missed you so much. At that moment, I finally realized Jason and Luciana had been in contact all along. Not only that, but Jason had taken Santiago to see her more than once. When I turned to look at Jason, his expression stiffened, and he hurried to explain. I just ran into Luci a few times when I picked up Santi from school. His feeble excuse made my heart sink. Later, a sudden wave surged on the beach. Luciana and I were both swept into the water. There was no high tide, and the waves weren't strong enough to drag anyone under. It was like a test of Jason's true feelings. And in that moment, he made his choice. He forgot I was his wife, forgot that my injured leg was a result of saving him. Without hesitation, he abandoned me to save Luciana, and now he dares to ask me if this is worth a divorce? Of course, it is. Jason and Santiago can choose not to love me, but I refuse not to love myself. Chapter 2. I looked him in the eye and asked, word by word, what if something had happened to me? What if I hadn't been able to drag myself out of the waves with my injured leg? Jason, the only reason I'm standing here asking for a divorce is because I survived. Jason opened his mouth, and before he could think, the words slipped out. But you didn't. Realizing the mistake in his response, he stopped mid-sentence. His face stiffened, and he averted his gaze, taking a deep breath. On the surface, he was trying to persuade me, but his words were nothing but a threat. Without me, with no parents and no family, where would you even go? I smiled and pushed the divorce agreement toward him. That's none of your concern. Just sign it. Consider it as repaying the favor for when I saved your life. Jason was a proud man. He hated it when I mentioned that debt, and he was convinced that I wouldn't leave my son behind. He thought I was just throwing a tantrum. The moment I brought up the favor, his expression darkened. His voice turned cold. You bring up that life-saving favor every time you open your mouth. Fine. Divorce it is, but once it's done, don't expect me to take you back so easily. You can spend some time outside reflecting on your behavior. In the end, I got my wish. I received the divorce certificate. I returned to the house I had lived in for 7 years, ready to pack my things. The house was big. There were a lot of things, but what truly belonged to me was barely anything at all. I looked around at the countless expensive and elegant belongings, and in the end, I went up to the attic and retrieved the only thing that was truly mine, my easel. I slung it over my back and walked out of the villa. At the gate, I happened to look up and see Santiago standing on the second-floor balcony. His lips were pressed into a tight line, his small face cold and unreadable. He simply stood there, watching me in silence. Maybe he was hoping I would walk up to him like I always did, hug him, kiss him, and apologize. I paused, looked at him, and finally let out a soft sigh. Then, in a quiet voice, I told him, eat well, sleep well. From now on, Mom won't be around. You need to take care of yourself. Santiago's eyes turned red. He clenched his jaw, then turned his head away with a cold huff. Go. Then, Aunt Luci will take care of me anyway. I don't need you. I stopped for a moment, then said nothing more. Under the setting sun, I walked away with my easel on my back. Santiago wasn't always like this. Before Luciana came back, he was sweet and loving. Whenever his friends teased him because I couldn't ride horses or play golf, he would always stand firm and say seriously, "So what? As long as she loves me, she's the best mom in the world." But after Luciana returned, after Jason took him to see her a few times, he changed completely. The boy who once only loved me suddenly despised me for my background. He refused to let me pick him up from kindergarten. When he invited friends over, he told me to leave the house and not come back until they were gone. Even on the anniversary of my parents' passing, when I mourned and shed tears, he would coldly accuse me of being ungraceful. Looking back now, he and Jason truly were father and son. They liked the same person. They hated the same person. Loving Luciana, despising me. After realizing Jason didn't love me, I spent night after night unable to sleep. I couldn't stand betrayal, but I couldn't bear to leave Santiago either. Yet the way he despised me, the way he pushed me away, it made my reluctance feel like a joke. Chapter 3. The road out of the Villa district wasn't long, but for me, it had taken 7 years to walk it. As I strolled down the small path under the glow of the setting sun, memories from the past flooded my mind. 15 years ago, my father died saving Jason's father. My mother, devastated by grief, passed away soon after. Left alone at such a young age, I was taken in by the Ning family. Jason Ning was their only son, an arrogant young master who stood above everyone else. But back then, he was good to me, so good that I naively fell for him. Then he fell in love with Luciana and started dating her. That was when I buried my feelings deep inside. Even when they eventually broke up, I never once thought of pursuing him. But after an accident in which I saved his life, he was the one who came looking for me. With the support of Mr. and Mrs. Ning, he started pursuing me. He was the man I had secretly loved for years. I couldn't bring myself to reject him. After his relentless persistence, I finally said yes. We followed the expected path, marriage. Then Santiago's birth. I thought we would be together forever. Luciana's return shattered that illusion. 3 months ago. I went to pick up a drunk Jason from a private lounge. Before I could enter, I overheard his friends talking about Luciana. Luci's back. What do you think about that? Jason, resting his head on one hand while swirling a glass of red wine with the other, gave a helpless smile. What can I do? I'm already married. His friends, eager to stir the pot, pressed on. But what if you weren't? You two loved each other so much back then. You nearly died for her. Remember? Jason let out a bitter laugh. What nonsense are you talking about? Oh, right. I forgot. It was your wife who saved your life. And she ended up with a bad leg because of it. Guess that means you can't betray her. Huh? The bitter smile on Jason's lips was enough to pierce my heart. I couldn't bring myself to walk in. It was in that moment I realized he had never loved me. All he had for me was guilt. I had been trapped in his web of lies for 7 years. But at least it wasn't too late. Beneath the evening glow, I was finally reclaiming my freedom. That night, I moved into a hotel I had booked in advance. Not long after, Mr. and Mrs. Ning called. They still had no idea Jason and I were divorced. With their usual warmth, they asked when I would bring Santiago back for dinner. I thought of Mr. Ning's high blood pressure and swallowed back the words lingering on my lips. Instead, I simply shook my head and said I had been busy lately. After hanging up, I sent Jason a message. Your parents just called, asking when I'd bring Santiago back for dinner. I covered for now, but you should tell them about our divorce soon. It took a long time before he finally replied. Got it. I had done my part. From now on, Jason and I had nothing to do with each other. Feeling relieved, I deleted his contact and blocked his number. That night, I ran my fingers over the old easel I had brought from the villa. Memories of my childhood surfaced, of the time I nestled in my parents' arms and made a solemn vow. When I grow up, I'll become a great artist. Back then, my parents had lovingly patted my head and smiled. Yes, our Virginia will be the greatest artist in the world. But after entering the Ning family, I never picked up a paintbrush again. Mr. and Mrs. Ning had subtly guided me away from that dream. Virginia, it's good to study this. Jason is studying it too. I was too young, too foolish. I let myself be blinded by a life that was never meant for me. I abandoned my dream and chose a path that never belonged to me. This easel, now aged and stained, was a reflection of that forgotten dream. No matter how hard I wiped it, the stains remained, but if I wiped long enough, they would fade. Looking at the now slightly brighter easel, I finally smiled. I took out the paintbrushes I had bought earlier from a small shop, pressed paper onto the easel, and tried to sketch the dreams of my childhood once again. Just as my brush touched the paper, my phone rang. The number was familiar. It was Sandra, Jason's assistant. Madam, Mr. Ning is drunk from a business dinner. He's making a scene and demanding to see you. Are you able to come pick him up? In the past, whenever Jason got drunk, he would always insist on me coming to get him. His assistant had long been accustomed to calling me for such things. But now, we were divorced. I set down my paintbrush and spoke softly, but firmly. I can't. Jason and I are divorced. Please don't call me about him again. Suddenly, a loud crashing sound echoed through the phone. I paused but continued. Check his contacts. There should be someone named Luciana. She's more suited to pick him up than I am. Just as I was about to hang up, a strained, hoarse voice came through the receiver. Virginia, are you really going to leave me like this? I thought I must have misheard. After all, a man who cheated wouldn't have the audacity to sound so righteous. I chuckled lightly, ignored him, bid Sandra goodbye, and ended the call. Picking up my brush again, I let all the noise in my heart bleed onto the canvas. Chapter 4. I had stayed up late the night before. So when my phone rang, I was woken up in a daze. My voice carried inevitable frustration as I answered. Who is it? Why are you calling so early in the morning? On the other end, the familiar voice of the villa's housekeeper, Aunt 2, sounded cautious. Virginia, Santi is sick. Jason left early this morning, and his phone is unreachable. Could you come back and check on him? The moment I heard that Santiago was sick, my heart clenched. No mother could remain indifferent upon hearing that their child was unwell, even if that child didn't love her. I froze for a few seconds before replying anxiously. I'll be there right away. When I arrived at Santiago's room, I found him lying alone in bed. His small figure looked pitifully lonely, and my heart ached as I quickly walked over, reaching out to touch his forehead. "Are you feeling uncomfortable?" His red-rimmed eyes flickered with grievance when he saw me, but in the next second, he swatted my hand away. He pulled the blanket over his head and muttered in a muffled voice, "You left. Why are you coming back now? You shouldn't have come back." Santiago rarely fell ill, and seeing him this vulnerable softened my heart, which I had steeled just days ago. I sat on the edge of the bed and gently pulled the blanket down a little so he wouldn't suffocate. His flushed little face peeked out, and his swollen, tear-filled eyes met mine. I was stunned for a moment, then regret overwhelmed me. He was only 5 years old. What did he know? He rejected me and clung to Luciana because of Jason's influence. He was like a blank canvas, shaped by those around him. Why had I let myself be bothered by the words of a mere child? The more I thought about it, the more guilt consumed me. My voice trembled. "Santi, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have left you. I shouldn't have abandoned you here. No, I couldn't leave Santiago to Jason. He was still young. There was still time to change things." With newfound determination, I wrapped my arms around his small body and spoke softly. "Santi, come with mommy, okay? I'll talk to daddy again about custody." I could feel his resistance waver. He even nuzzled against my arms slightly, as if the sweet, affectionate Santiago from before had returned. He stayed in my embrace for a long time before he finally murmured, "Don't bother. You won't get custody of me." I stroked his head gently, my tone unwavering. "I'll trade everything I got from the divorce to get you back." Santiago pushed me away and stared at me with reddened eyes. Then, in the softest, most innocent voice, he uttered the cruelest words. "Mom, don't be naive. With Daddy, I have Aunt Luci to take care of me, luxury cars to ride in, and the best schools to attend. But with you, you have nothing to offer me. Besides, Daddy will never give me to you. Without me, you wouldn't even be able to leave this house." His words lodged in my throat, suffocating me. "Mommy will try to negotiate with Daddy." Santiago's face remained cold as he cut off my feeble argument. "Mom, I won't go with you. You don't belong in the Ning family. When Aunt Luci came back, you should have stepped aside for her. Just leave. Don't come back. I don't want to see you again. From now on, Aunt Luci will be my mom." I had heard these words before, but no matter how many times he said them, they still hurt. Tears blurred my vision as I stared at the child I had carried for 10 months and brought into this world. He turned his head away and pointed at the door with his small hand. "Go. I don't want to see you anymore." I didn't move. I just looked at him. The next moment, he grabbed the cup on his nightstand and threw it at my feet. With a loud crash, the porcelain shattered. A sharp shard grazed my ankle, and a thin line of blood surfaced on my skin. The sting of the wound was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. In that moment, the remorse I had felt when I entered the room suddenly seemed like a joke. Santiago hadn't been manipulated by Jason. He was simply born cold-hearted, and he simply didn't love me. I took 2 steps back, then turned and walked out of the room. Before stepping past the doorway, I couldn't help but look back one last time. "Santiago, once I leave this time, I won't be coming back." The only response was another cup smashing onto the floor. I wiped away my tears and, this time, I didn't look back. As I walked out, I ran into the housekeeper. She looked at me with concern, then glanced toward Santiago's room. "Did Santi upset you again?" I shook my head and spoke softly. "No, I upset him, and from now on, please don't contact me about him anymore. He doesn't want to see me." Then, without waiting for a reply, I walked past her. As I stepped away, I vaguely heard her murmuring, "That's impossible. He calls for you even in his dreams." I wiped away the tears that threatened to fall again. Impossible. He had told me, time and time again, that he didn't need me. Chapter 5. On the way back. As I looked at the familiar scenery along the streets, I suddenly felt as if this city had become unbearably foreign. My phone kept vibrating with calls from an unknown number. When I finally answered, Jason's voice came through. "Virginia, Santi is sick. Why didn't you stay with him?" I let out a cold laugh. hatred rising in my chest. Jason, isn't this exactly what you wanted? Santiago doesn't want me as his mother anymore. You must be so proud of yourself. Jason sounded flustered, his words coming in a rush. That's not what I meant. I just didn't want him to hate Luci. I could no longer suppress my emotions. My voice cracked with fury. So you chose to make him hate me instead? Virginia, that's not what I wanted. I just wanted Santi to accept Luci, so that you wouldn't reject her so much. I interrupted him with a sneer. Jason, tell me, why should I accept Luciana? Why should I accept a woman who destroyed my marriage? Jason fell silent. The silence stretched so long that I lost the will to argue. I hung up the call and stared at the fleeting trees outside the car window. I suddenly didn't want to stay in this city anymore. Clutching my phone, I leaned forward and spoke to the driver. Sir, do you take long-distance trips? I want to go to City A. City A, the hometown of my parents. I missed them. I submitted my resignation, returned to the hotel to grab my luggage, and left for City A. I admit, I was a coward. I was afraid that if I stayed, I would waver and eventually compromise for Santiago, sinking back into that hopeless abyss. After all, when I was young, I gave up my paintbrush for a hidden love. For over a decade, I never picked it up again. Whenever I felt nostalgic, I would take out my easel and hesitate. Should I start again? But each time, I let it slip away, drowned by my busy life and by Santiago calling mommy over and over again. Now, after the divorce, those shackles no longer existed. It felt like I had been reborn. Perhaps I should be grateful to Santiago. If he had clung to me just a little more, I might still be trapped in that abyss, struggling. Now, everything had fallen into place as it should. I would take my easel and slowly find my younger self again in City A. I rented a small house and started my journey of living alone. Life became as colorful as an oil painting, vibrant and free. My days were simple. I carried my easel outdoors in the daytime, and at night, I curled up in my little home with a book. Along the way, I met a group of strangers. Some were retired elders. Others were students from nearby art academies. We never made plans, but we always ran into each other at the most beautiful spots. Together, we painted emerald lakes, golden leaves, and sunsets that bathed the world in warm hues. At first, I wasn't very good. Whenever people walked past me, I would instinctively cover my canvas, afraid they would laugh at me. But over time, as I painted more and more, I stopped being afraid. People learn through trial and error. Mistakes weren't scary. What was truly terrifying was not having the courage to start over. So even when my paintings didn't follow the conventional rules, I set up my easel with confidence and slowly corrected each stroke. Today's autumn landscape by the lake was the same. When I first finished it, I was unsatisfied. The colors were too dull. The contrast between light and shadow was weak, and the elements in the painting lacked connection. But I didn't abandon it. Instead, I took out my paintbrush and carefully adjusted every detail, trying to shape it into the scene I had envisioned. By the time the sun had set, I finally stretched my sore back and put down my brush with a sigh of relief. As I gazed at my painting, I smiled in satisfaction. Finally done. This one turned out pretty well, much better than your earlier ones. At first, I thought this young lady had completely ruined the painting. I didn't dare to look, afraid she'd get embarrassed and hide it like before. But in the end, it turned out amazing. I looked up, startled to find a group of elderly folks gathered around me. They were all commenting on my painting. They praised my progress, teased me about how shy I used to be, and encouraged me to keep going. Standing among them, I pressed my lips together and smiled. So what if I made mistakes? As long as I held my brush, I could always correct them, shaping them into what I truly wanted, even if it was difficult, even if the final result wasn't perfect. At least I was moving forward, heading toward the future I wanted. And so was my life. Chapter 6. Autumn in City A was short. In the blink of an eye, snowflakes had begun to drift down from the sky. The cold made everyone go out less for plein-air painting. And I, too, started painting at home for my own enjoyment. To track my progress, I began live streaming my painting sessions without showing my face. I often talked to myself while painting. This color doesn't seem right. I should use this instead. Not bad. The composition looks much more harmonious now. Wow. The contrast in light and shadow here is great. I'm a genius. Over time, my stream gathered a small following, reaching a few hundred viewers. Many of them would drop by to chat with me while I painted, enjoying my rambling monologues. Among them, 2 usernames stood out: Falling Stars and Baby. Falling Stars had been one of my very first viewers when I started streaming. Baby joined about a month later. The reason they stood out was simple: they were both incredibly generous with their donations. No matter how much I tried to dissuade them, they had easily become the top 2 contributors to my stream. What was even stranger was that they seemed to know each other and were constantly bickering. Falling Stars had a strong fatherly tone, always giving critiques alongside his praise. Baby was the complete opposite. No matter how badly I messed up, he would shower me with compliments, blindly supporting everything I did. This, of course, led to frequent clashes between them. Baby, do you even know how to paint? Stop acting like some art critic, it's annoying. Falling Stars, at least I'm better than a little brat who hasn't even finished elementary school. Baby, you talk too much. No wonder you don't have a wife. Falling Stars, yeah? Well, your mom left too. I often scrolled through their arguments during my breaks, shaking my head at the absurdity. But no matter how much they fought, they always stood on the same side when it came to defending me. Whenever someone entered my stream to cause trouble, asking me to show my face, making rude remarks, these 2 would instantly set aside their differences and drive the intruder out. I never started streaming to make money, so I had always treated it as something casual. But their unwavering support still touched me. Wanting to thank them, I offered to send them each a painting as a gift. Smiling, I asked them to send me their addresses. However, neither of them responded. Thinking they had stepped away, I sent them direct messages. Thank you for always supporting me. If you don't mind, leave your address, and I'll send you one of my favorite recent paintings as a gift. That day, neither of them spoke in the chat again. It wasn't until I was about to end my stream that I finally received their messages. Their addresses were identical, and, coincidentally, they lived in the city I had fled from. I stared at their usernames, a ridiculous thought forming in my mind. Then, I couldn't help but laugh. How could they possibly be Jason and Santiago? One was probably busy basking in his newlywed bliss. The other was likely celebrating his new, high-status mother. Chapter 7. The next day, I stepped out into the swirling snowfall. I went to the local market and bought some of City A's famous specialties. Then, I packed them along with the promised paintings and sent them off to the 2 of them. When I got home, I didn't rush to rest. Instead, I started a live stream and set up my easel. I had begun to suspect that Falling Stars didn't actually have a job. Every time I started a stream, he was always the first to arrive, greeting me without fail. In contrast, Baby was more like a student. He usually only appeared in the evenings. Glancing at the chat, I responded to Falling Stars casually. I've sent out the paintings. Let Baby know later. Then, I lowered my head and continued painting. Earlier in the day, I had seen a heartwarming scene in the snow. A father laughing cheerfully, a mother wrapped in a red scarf, a chubby little baby bundled up between them, holding both their hands. Snowflakes drifted down. The snow-covered ground looked soft and untouched. It was a perfect picture of happiness. It reminded me of my parents and me. Once upon a time, I had made up my mind then that I would paint the scene as soon as I got home. Immersed in my work, I carefully filled the canvas with the warmth and joy I had seen. Just as I was about to adjust the details, the doorbell rang. Frowning, I put down my brush and went to open the door. Standing outside was my neighbor, a cheerful young man with a bright smile and a set of white teeth. Virginia, I saw a package for you at the delivery station. It looked like a heavy bag of rice, so I figured I'd bring it up for you. Only then did I remember ordering fragrant rice online 2 days ago. Grateful, I thanked him and reached out to take the bag. But my neighbor was too enthusiastic. He refused to let go. Where do you want it? I'll carry it inside for you. Embarrassed, I smiled and pointed toward the kitchen. He placed it down effortlessly. To thank him, I offered him some water and pulled out fresh fruit from my fridge, stuffing it into his arms despite his polite refusals. Once he left, I returned to my easel. As I glanced at the screen, I was met with a flood of messages from falling stars. Is there a man in your house? Who is he? What is he doing there? What is your relationship with him? I scrolled through my messages and found that he had also sent me a barrage of private messages, all filled with aggressive questioning. The last one read, Virginia, answer me. Who is he? I blinked, and suddenly, everything clicked. Falling stars was Jason, which meant baby was Santiago. I didn't answer him. I simply ended the live stream. I had no idea what they were trying to do now. Did they think that after I left, they had suddenly realized my worth? If that was the case, then they were truly shameless. For the next few days, I didn't stream at all. Thankfully, I had been cautious when sending the paintings and hadn't provided my exact address. If they were really foolish enough to come looking for me, it would take them some time, or so I thought. I never expected to see them so soon. After staying indoors for days, I finally decided to go out for some fresh air. But when I opened my door, I froze. Standing right outside were Jason and Santiago, one tall, one small, both staring at me, unblinking. Chapter 8. After pouring Santiago a cup of warm water, I sat down across from Jason. I stared at him coldly as he scanned the room with a serious expression. Why are you here? Santiago sat beside me, holding his glass with an indifferent face. The two of them together, both stiff and tense, made me scoff. Once Jason seemed satisfied that there was no other man in the house. His frown eased slightly. He looked at me with a softened tone. Virginia, long time no see. How have you been? I frowned. Skip the nonsense. Santi's winter break is coming up. He wanted to see you. Santiago was my child. Regardless of whether he liked me or not, I still had a responsibility toward him. I turned to Santiago and asked gently, do you want to stay with me? He took a small sip of his warm water, his face expressionless as he shook his head. No, Dad forced me to come. I let out a bitter chuckle before turning to Jason with a mocking smile. Don't use a child as an excuse. Jason's face darkened, and his tone turned sharp. Santiago, speak properly. I had no patience for him scolding a child in front of me. With a cold smile, I cut him off. Enough with the performance, Jason, and don't forget, we're divorced. You shouldn't be disturbing me anymore. If Santiago wants to visit during his school breaks, send someone to bring him over. But as for you, I don't see any reason for us to meet again. Jason opened his mouth as if to say something, but instead, his expression turned weary and defeated. Virginia, I don't understand. I never cheated on you with Luciana. She was just a friend. And about the time you fell into the water, I swear it won't happen again. From now on, I'll always put you first. So why did you still insist on divorcing me? You used to love me so much. You even injured your leg saving me. What changed? I exhaled slowly and met his gaze. Jason, did you ever truly marry me out of love? If you really loved me, then why? When Luciana and I fell into the water, did you choose to save her first? Why did you take Santiago to see her and constantly tell me to accept her? Jason, don't insult the word love. It's disgusting. His face grew paler with every word I said. For years, I had bottled up my grievances, but now, I let them pour out. Jason, yes, I loved you when I was young, but when I risked my life to pull you out of that car wreck, it wasn't because I wanted to impress you. Even if it had been a stranger in danger, I would have done the same. But Jason, what did you do in return? You knew you didn't love me, yet you married me out of guilt and pretended to love me. Did you think you were compensating me? Do you still believe that you're the one suffering? My parents raised me to be kind. But do you know something, Jason? When I realized you married me out of guilt, I regretted saving you more than anything. Jason stared at me blankly, his eyes turning red. That's not true. I love you too. I just realized it too late. I took a deep breath and pointed at the door. That's no longer my concern. Don't come looking for me again. Santiago was the first to leave. Just before stepping out, he glanced at me, his gaze lingering. My heart wavered, and I called out to him, Santiago, Do you want to stay with me for a few days? That look in his eyes, it was full of attachment. But his words were unwavering. No, I never stay in small houses. His cold reply made me wonder if I had only imagined the softness in his gaze. After they left, I leaned against the door and sighed. If Santiago had stayed, I would have inevitably remained entangled with Jason. If not for his repeated cruelty, I would have never truly been free. In the months that followed, I moved several times, yet Jason always found me. With his wealth and power, my whereabouts must have been nothing but an open book to him. Realizing this, I gave up on moving. Instead, I chose to act as if he didn't exist. After dropping Santiago off, Jason shamelessly lingered. Whenever I went for a walk, he followed behind me, reminiscing as if we were old friends. Virginia, we used to walk like this when we were kids. It feels just like old times, doesn't it? When I joined elderly neighbors and students to paint outdoors, he trailed behind in his car, watching. I would sit with my easel, sketching landscapes, and he would stand quietly nearby, waiting until I finished before speaking. You know, when you first came to my house, you were carrying an easel just like this one. I always thought you loved painting, but then you stopped. I never saw you pick up a brush again, until now. Chapter 9. The elderly neighbors grinned and teased me. Virginia, is this your boyfriend? I shook my head seriously and corrected them. No, he's my ex-husband. We're divorced. He's just pestering me. Then, I briefly explained the reason behind our divorce. The moment they heard the full story, the old folks became indignant. So the next time Jason followed me to a painting session, they worked together to keep him away from me. Their faces were openly hostile, their words sharp and unwelcoming. I was touched but still tried to persuade them otherwise. He'll leave soon. There's no need for this. Besides, I've already moved on. And I was right, Jason did leave soon after. Work called him back to the city. Before he left, he looked at me seriously and made a promise. Once I finish things at work, I'll come back for you. I love you. I smiled but said nothing. No matter how many times he returned, I would never look back. His so-called love was like expired milk, rotten and nauseating. Later, he did come back just as he had promised, bringing Santiago with him. He even tried to use Santiago as an excuse to make me remarry him. Can you bear to let Santi grow up in a single-parent household? You love him so much, why not give him the best? But Jason had done too good a job brainwashing Santiago in the past. Santiago merely lifted his eyelids and replied coldly, Dad, you can marry Aunt Lucy or someone else. Any woman can be my mother. Jason's eyes darkened as he turned to glare at him. I, on the other hand, couldn't help but chuckle. Then, I shut the door in their faces. After a few more times of Santiago ruining Jason's plans, he stopped bringing him along. Instead, he traveled alone between City A and the capital, constantly repeating the same old apologies and confessions of love. I remained indifferent, sometimes even laughing at his persistence. Over time, he visited less and less. By the 5th year, he stopped coming altogether. Perhaps he finally got tired of chasing after a lost cause. Not that it had anything to do with me. By then, I had already made a name for myself as an oil painter in China, and I had also started dating my old neighbor. When I decided to marry him, Santiago unexpectedly came to visit. He was 12 by then, already resembling a small adult. He handed me a bouquet of red roses, his dark eyes deep and unreadable. Mom, I wish you happiness. Then, he stuffed the flowers into my arms and turned away without looking back. Watching his retreating figure, I absent-mindedly reached for my fiancé's hand. My voice held a trace of nostalgia. It's been so long. He seems to have grown up a lot. My fiancé wrapped an arm around my waist and gently patted my hand. Yeah, time flies. On my wedding day, I saw Santiago again. The night before, I had sent him an invitation. He hadn't rejected it. But he hadn't accepted it either. I thought he wouldn't come, but on the day of the wedding, he showed up in a sleek black suit. He took my arm, escorting me down the aisle, step by step toward my groom. Then, before placing my hand in my husband's, he leaned in and whispered a chilling warning. Anyone who hurts my mother will suffer. The last guy is already lying in a hospital bed. You better be careful. My fiancé's face turned pale as he frantically shook his head. I swear, I will love and protect her for the rest of my life. I swear on my life. I turned to Santiago, surprised. His face was solemn, his eyes red-rimmed as he fiercely warned my husband never to mistreat me. Tears welled up in my eyes. Perhaps Santiago had never truly hated me back then. After all, when he was 5, he had loved me dearly. Perhaps, in his own way, he had always loved me by letting me go. Chapter 10 Jason's Side Story. 7 years into my marriage, Luciana came back. I won't deny it, I was a little shaken. After all, she was the woman I had loved so deeply in my youth. But I never considered leaving Virginia. Yet, after that day, after I instinctively chose to save Luciana first when they both fell into the water, Virginia asked me for a divorce. I panicked for a moment. But then, I reassured myself. She had nowhere to go. She had loved me for so many years, she couldn't possibly leave me. And there was Santiago, her most cherished son. After his birth, she had loved him even more than she had ever loved me. Surely, she wouldn't leave him behind. I was certain she was just angry. She would calm down after a while. She would never abandon Santiago and leave me. But I was wrong. Virginia truly didn't want me anymore. She didn't even want Santiago. I drank myself into a stupor and called her, expecting her to pick me up. I thought, after a few days, surely she had calmed down. Surely she would take this opportunity to come back. But she didn't. She repeated over and over that we were divorced. A strange panic crept over me. That night, I went home in a daze. In the living room, I saw Santiago playing with the Rubik's Cube Virginia had bought him. When he saw me, he barely lifted his eyes, gave me a cold glance, and then lowered his head again. At that moment, an idea struck me. That night, I took away Santiago's blanket. The next morning, as I had expected, he caught a cold. I didn't believe for a second that Virginia could ignore a sick Santiago. She would have to come back. Feeling pleased, I told the housekeeper to call her, to avoid making her angry. I even left the house, giving her space. Before leaving, I reminded Santiago to keep her here. He raised his fever-flushed face and let out a quiet ahem. Satisfied, I walked out the door. Soon Virginia would come back, begging me to take her back. But once again, I miscalculated. Virginia didn't return. Instead, she left the city. She went to her parents' hometown. That was when I finally realized I might actually lose her. I hired a private investigator to track her down. I found out that she had fallen in love with oil painting, that she had made new friends, that she had even started live streaming. I optimistically told myself, maybe she just needed some time away. Maybe, after she had some time to think, she would come back. So I watched her streams every day. Santiago, upon finding out, began watching every night too. I figured he must have had the same thought as me. He wanted her back just as much as I did. After all, Virginia wasn't just angry at me. Otherwise, Santiago would have been able to make her stay. I waited like a fool, convinced that if I was patient enough, she would eventually return to me. But the moment I heard another man's voice on her stream, I lost it. I demanded to know who he was, what he was to her. Virginia didn't even acknowledge me. She simply shut down her stream. At that moment, I knew she had figured out who I was. And worse than that, she still refused to forgive me. I couldn't just sit back any longer. I booked a flight and dragged Santiago with me to City A. On the plane, I drilled into his head the importance of convincing his mother to come back. Santiago merely scoffed and shook his head. I grabbed his shoulders, shaking him slightly as I demanded, "Don't you want your mother to be with you as you grow up?" He stared out of the window at the clouds. His voice, though young, was cold. "You were never good to her. Given the choice between staying with me and being free, I'd rather see her free." I froze, my eyes widening in disbelief. No, she belongs to me. Santiago had always been intelligent, sharp beyond his years. He met my gaze without a hint of warmth. "Give up, Dad. She's been disappointed in you for a long time, and I won't help you chain her down." Later, we saw Virginia again, just as Santiago had predicted. She rejected me. He kept his word. He never once tried to persuade her to come home. In fact, he did the opposite. He used cruel words to push her further and further away. I refused to let go. I clung to her desperately, but she treated me like air, until, in the 5th year after our divorce, I could no longer chase after her. I had fallen seriously ill. Santiago sat by my hospital bed, sneering at me. "Serves you right." I struggled to sit up, staring at him for a long time before finally speaking. "Did you do it on purpose? Did you deliberately make her angry so she would have no reason to stay?" He was only 10 years old, yet he had matured far beyond his years. He met my gaze with a cold smirk and answered with an eerie calm. "5 years ago, when that woman came back, Mom cried a lot behind your back, especially at night. After tucking me in, she would hold me and cry until she fell asleep. She wanted a divorce, but she couldn't bear to leave me, because she knew you would never give her custody. She struggled for a long time. She became exhausted and haggard. I loved her so much, so if she wanted to leave, I would help her leave without any burdens. So yes, I did it on purpose. But wasn't it all because of you in the first place?" I stared at him, stunned. It all made sense now. I had always wondered why Santiago had changed so suddenly. He had always been so attached to Virginia, so loving toward her. How could a few words from outsiders make him despise her and treat her so cruelly? It turned out, he had planned it all along. He had acted that way so Virginia could leave without any regrets. The realization stabbed through my chest, twisting deep into my heart. I let out a bitter laugh, mocking him. "But you lost her too." Santiago only smiled. It was a soft, obedient smile, the kind he used to give Virginia. "As long as she's happy, that's enough. Oh, by the way, I have some good news for you. She's getting married soon." She invited me to her wedding. "The patient's heart rate is abnormal." "What did you say to him?" "Get out. He needs immediate treatment." In the chaos, I caught a glimpse of nurses and doctors rushing toward me. Santiago, however, remained calm. After being reprimanded, he walked out of the room, unbothered, hands in his pockets. Then, everything around me faded into silence. The darkness swallowed me whole. For the first time, I truly regretted it all. If I could go back to that moment, if I could choose again, I would have saved Virginia first. Maybe then, she wouldn't have left me. Chapter 11: Santiago's Revenge. Jason died when I was 15. After his death, with my grandfather's help, I slowly took over the company. Once I had full control, the first thing I did was destroy Luciana's family. The woman who once made my mother cry came crawling to me, begging for mercy. "Santiago, please, for the sake of our past, spare my family." Past? What past? The past where she made my mother miserable? The past where she tore me away from my mother? I coldly shook my head and crushed her family even harder. Her family went bankrupt. I took over their company. When I found out she was buried under billions in debt, I graciously let her work for me. I even made sure the employees she had once humiliated were promoted to be her bosses. But within a few years, she couldn't take it anymore. She ended her own life. TSK. How boring. Managing a company was exhausting, but if I didn't do it, I wouldn't be able to protect my mother. I wanted to give her the best of everything. Before, I pushed her away so she could be happy. Now, I worked tirelessly to ensure she would always be safe. Because if her new husband ever dared to hurt her the way Jason did, I would make sure she had a place to return to. I would never let her suffer again. Not like before, when I pretended to be heartless just to let her go. She had loved me so much back then. Now that I was grown, I would never let her cry for me again.